Starting to record. All right. Hello, folks. Welcome. It's really great to be seeing people filtering in. Feel free, take a minute or so to get comfortable, to get situated. If you are eating lunch, to grab your lunch. We'll get started in a moment here. You're here for the Washington Bikes 2023 Legislative Lunch and Learn. We're so happy to have you here. Really looking forward to session starting in just a few days, which feels bananas, but it'll be a really great ride. Like I said, you're in the right place, the Washington Bikes Legislative Lunch and Learn. As we get going too, feel free to drop your name and where you're joining us from into the chat. We have folks registered from all across Washington State, which is super exciting. Feel free to let us know where you're coming to us from. And we'll also have the opportunity throughout the next hour to be answering some questions and having some discussion with our State Policy Director, Alex Alston, as well as with Senate Transportation Chair, Marko Liias. So if you have questions on your mind that you have for either of them, feel free to drop them in there and we'll collect them, and then we'll be sharing them out near the end of the hour. So I'm going to take another 30 seconds or so to let a couple more people join, and then we will get going. And as you join, you'll notice we're in meeting mode today. That's so that we have the opportunity for folks to chat with each other a little bit. We'll have an opportunity for you all to have some smaller breakout spaces to get to know each other a little bit more. But please keep in mind that because we're in a meeting space, it's really important that you stay on mute when you're not speaking so that we don't have cross noise or feedback or any issues like that that come up. And we will be recording this session, so feel free to not be taking harrowed, panicked notes as we go through. You'll have the opportunity to come back to this content and make sure that you have all the info that you need. But with that, I think that we'll get going. Thank you all again for being here. Really appreciate you joining us for this Lunch and Learn and for session. So excited for the next 105 days. Before we get going, I want to start with a land acknowledgement. This Lunch and Learn is virtual, and you're all joining us from communities across the state. I'm currently on the traditional home of the Duwamish people, and I take the opportunity now to thank the original caretakers of this land who are still here. And if you don't know whose lands you're on, you can look in the chat in a minute where Rachel will be dropping a link that you can use to find what land you're on. Without these communities, we wouldn't have access to this environment. And so I want to take the opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land who are still here. And like I said, we are recording this session. It will be available for all of you to access following today. And again, would just like to remind you to please keep your audio muted when not speaking so that we make sure that everyone can hear us. And additionally, closed captioning is enabled. So if that's something that you need, please feel free to turn that on. So over the next hour, we're going to be sharing a lot of info. We're going to have some fabulous guests. And so I wanted to give an agenda for some quick framing. We're going to start with some introductions to session, to each other. Then we'll be joined by our guest, Senate Transportation Chair, Marko Liias, who will be sharing about his priorities for the upcoming session. We'll get a little bit deeper into the nitty-gritty of our key priorities, about how we're going to win going forward, and about how all of you will be a part of the work that we're doing, because we can't do this work without you. And then we'll finish up with some next steps, talking about where we go from here and how you're all going to be able to get involved. So I'm going to pass things off to Alex Alston, our State Policy Director, legislative expert extraordinaire, for a little bit of high-level introduction, and then we will kick it off into breakout rooms. But Alex, I'll pass it to you.
Great. Thank you, Tamar. And thanks everyone for joining us here today in preparation for the 2023 legislative session. I'm Alex Alston. I've had the honor of working on behalf of Washington Bikes state policy objectives since 2016. And for those of you who are maybe new to this space or to WaBikes, Washington Bikes is a C4 org and the sister organization of Cascade Bicycle Club. So Washington Bikes can endorse candidates, ballot measures, give funds. But why we're here today is that Washington Bikes is also the arm that leads our statewide bicycling advocacy work. And so we work in Olympia and around the state to improve bicycling, and that's whether it be for transportation or recreation. We want safer spaces that are easy to access for people to bicycle, walk, or roll. And we work to achieve these goals through policy change at the state level and also through securing funding for active transportation investments and infrastructure. And so we're coming off of the 2022 short session where we secured historic wins for walking, biking, and rolling through the Move Ahead Washington Transportation Package. $1.3 billion in bike and pedestrian funding that will not only grow our legacy investments, but expand into new programs specifically focused on youth. And so in the upcoming year, we're really going to see implementation of the Move Ahead Washington package, as well as the policies that were associated with the package start to roll out. And an example of those are the Complete Streets Directive that is now required for WashDOT projects. We're already seeing that underway. And so while we secured unprecedented funding in the last session, we haven't quite seen that those funds kind of play out in communities yet. Instead of just waiting until we do, we're very fortunate to have transportation leaders who see the value in addressing the current traffic safety crisis through other strategies, which is what Washington Bikes will be championing this upcoming session and really focused on. And we'll get to dive into some of those specifics a bit later. You can see our high level priorities listed here on the slide though. And really quick, I'm just gonna switch gears to discuss the 2023 session lay of the land. So we're returning to in-person legislative session in Olympia, which is very exciting after 2 years of virtual session. So there will be some remote session additions still present, making this 2023 session somewhat of a hybrid. Committee chairs will have the discretion for their hearings to allow remote testimony. So there will likely be in-person testimony as well as people calling in. And the same is for individual legislative meetings. So legislators have the discretion to offer in-person, remote, or both. And so some of the other changes that we're seeing include the floors where the member offices are located are going to be managed by security. And so those won't be open for the public to move about freely. You'd have to have an appointment and be checked in and things like that. And so I think we're going to have an opportunity to dive in more with session specifics and issues. So I think for right now, I will pass it back to Tamar. Do you want to get us going in the breakouts?
Totally. Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
even though session is in person this year, we're all still doing a lot of our lives virtually. And sometimes it can be hard to feel like we're actually in this work together and in this space together. And so we're going to take a little bit of time now, just about 10 minutes to break out into breakout rooms where you'll be joined from some fellow fabulous advocates from around the state. And I want y'all to just take some time, share who you are, where you're joining us from, and what you're excited about this session. I think there's a lot of opportunity, and we're riding on the coattails, like Alex said, of some amazing investments in active transportation. So maybe some things have already started to change in your community. Maybe you're looking forward to some investments that are to come, but I want us to just take some time to chat a little bit. Maybe you have questions on your mind that you want to have for Alex and Marko as we get into our conversation, and you want to discuss those with some other folks. So with that, I'm going to create these rooms. You should get a notification come up on your screen right now. Feel free to join those rooms, and then I'll call you all back in about 10 minutes, and we'll be joined by Senator Liias. All right. Got a recording back. Good to see some familiar faces, some new faces. All right, folks are coming back in. Great. Welcome back, folks. I hope that was a nice sort of break from the virtual webinar of it all. Hope that you got to have some conversations with folks that maybe you don't know yet, some new folks, some new faces, some familiar ones, checking in about the things that you're excited about for this upcoming session. I know I have a laundry list of things, but this hour is not about me, so I won't share all of them, but hope that you all had some good opportunity. I am going to pass things off back to Alex here. Senator Liias will be joining us shortly, and we'll be getting into some of the things that he is most excited about in this session. But Alex, I'm going to spotlight you so that everyone can see you and we're not lost like looking around for your face in here before we get into talking to Liias. I'm wondering if there's anything else you want to share before he joins us, just about sort of the work that you are hoping to do with him, what you've heard from both him and Rep. Phi on the House side of things about what's coming up this session.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tamar, will you let me know when you see him? Okay, so just for folks on the call, we're expecting, Senator Liias was joining from another speaking engagement. And so it was a little bit of a moving target of when he'd be specifically joining. So yes, I think that little breakout session was actually great, because I think where there's a lot of interest is the 16-year package that was just passed, and starting to see, how those investments move forward and how things are prioritized in the transportation budget. And so that will certainly be a focus of this upcoming session. I will say, I think there were quite a few things about how that package passed that were very unique. And one was that it wasn't done in a bipartisan fashion. And so definitely hearing legislators' voice and interest to figure out how to have across the aisle kind of partnership and support of priorities moving in this 2023 session. Typically transportation packages were done in a bipartisan way. And so, so I think there will definitely be some focus there. And maybe this is an opportunity where we can kind of run through some of what Washington Bikes is really hoping to focus on as we wait for him. But every year when we go, we have a focus on investments on safe places to walk, bike, and roll for transportation and recreation. And the Move Ahead Washington package is obviously something. We have a few little cleanup items that need to happen, just because that was such an enormous lift. As you get towards implementation, you start to realize like, oh, we need some little tweaks. So we'll be working those. And then there's capital budget funding, as this is the biennial budget year. Oh,
and it looks like Senator Liias has joined. Sorry to interrupt.
Cool. Welcome. So, okay, I'm going to pause. I'm going to put a pin in. I was starting to kind of jump into Washington Bikes 2023 legislative agenda items, Senator Liias, just to get you up to speed here. And so I'm going to put a pin in that and introduce you. And then I'm hoping we can hand it off to you to kind of share some of what you're hoping to see in the 2023 session. And then we'd like to open up for some questions. And I think we'll get to weave in some of the active transportation priorities as we have that conversation. But I'd like to introduce Washington Senate Transportation Chair, who is one half of our state's innovative multimodal champion transportation committee chair team in Olympia, Senator Marko Liias from the 21st Legislative District. I am just really quickly going to share with folks that you likely had an opportunity to read about the success of Move Ahead Washington. But I'd just like to highlight that it came out with a really unique focus on our state's transportation system users of the future, our youth. And so we now have youth ride free. We have youth bike safety programs, as well as providing bikes for kids who wouldn't have otherwise had access to them. And that was really due to the vision and leadership of Senator Liias. And so for Washington Bikes, it was such a pleasure to get to partner and work alongside him. And I am hoping that you can kick off this time that we have together with sharing. It's your second year as the Senate Transportation Chair. And so what are some of the themes that we might see in your committee? What are some of the goals you have that you'd like to come out of the 2023 session having accomplished? Thank you.
Yay, thank you, Alex. And thank you to WA Bikes and Cascade for all the amazing advocacy last year to help us get Move Ahead Washington passed. Thanks to your work, by the year 2035, 90% of the children in our public schools will get bicycle education as a part of their elementary school curriculum. So 90% of the kids in Washington getting reached about how to bike and move around our communities safely is not an incremental win for our communities. It is a game-changing, bold, transformational investment. I just saw the CEO of Community Transit at the event that I just came from, and he shared that their early data shows that youth ridership on community transit up in Snohomish County, they don't know exactly because the data before wasn't great, but could have as much as doubled as a result of the kids ride free. So again, we aren't making incremental wins anymore. We are changing the paradigm on how people around the state move. Now, the challenge is when you are trying to move an aircraft carrier, you can't do a right turn in about 5 minutes. We've got to slowly but efficiently move the direction of our transportation system towards a sustainable, climate-friendly, safe system that we need to get to. I'm also excited, Chair Fai right now is in Italy, so I'm hoping he's going to bring back a lot of European inspiration from his travels in Germany and Italy and all over the place. So I'm sure we'll get even better ideas when he's back. The priorities this session are going to really be, I think, the core work we have is passing a 2-year budget, but in particular, a 2-year budget that integrates the new Move Ahead resources and begins to reflect the changing priorities. We also have a traffic safety crisis in this state. We are reaching epic levels of traffic fatalities, again, numbers we haven't seen in decades. It's unacceptable, and we've got to change direction, which will take social and cultural shifts around how we move around in our systems. And that's always hard, and people don't like to change the way they're doing things. But when almost or over, we don't know exactly yet, 700 people died on our system last year. That's not acceptable. We've got to go back towards target zero and head in the right direction. We also, as a Senate Democratic Caucus, have committed to making sure that in every single thing we do, we will bake equity, diversity, inclusion into our work. And we know in transportation, the system was built in ways that continue to perpetuate harms on communities of color, particularly our Black and Indigenous communities. And we need to do a better job of correcting those errors and building a better system that's inclusive of everyone as we move forward. And like I said at the outset, we need to dramatically reduce our climate emissions to get that climate-friendly system. That means in the short term, electrifying everything we can, and in the long term, shifting to more efficient ways of moving around our communities. These are going to be some of the broad priorities. Obviously, a lot of other things that matter outside of the bike ped space. Our ferry system is a critical piece of our infrastructure, and we got to figure out a path there. We've also got intersections with, Oregon and Idaho and other people as we think about our interstate connections. We've got to work through some of that. So there's a lot of other work to be done, but I think the core of our priorities are building a truly climate-friendly, multimodal system that's safe for all users. And we're on the path, but we've taken the first step. This year, it's time to take a couple more steps in that direction. And I'm excited, Alex, at your work to bring an agenda around some of those safety measures that can really make a difference for bike and ped and walkers and rollers in our states. That's really important. And we're gonna, when I see your agenda, it's sort of like what my agenda in my heart is. And then we got to figure out how we get the votes to get it passed into law. So those are some short opening comments. Happy to answer more detailed questions and chat with folks about whatever is on your mind.
That's great. Thank you so much. Okay, so I was just going to flag for folks, if you can be entering your questions that you might have into the chat. I think Tamar's working on kind of collecting those. And so anything you'd like to ask of Senator Liias while we have him here. And I was just gonna also ask if you would speak a little bit to, we did a little breakout session with small groups to hear kind of what folks were looking forward to in the 2023 session. And one of the themes that came up in our group was really around the thinking about how you'll be prioritizing what funding does move forward of the Move Ahead Washington package. So do you mind just sharing a little bit about what you and Rep. Fi are thinking there?
The great news is when it comes to our bike, ped, and transit lists, and sorry I used the shorthand bike, ped, and transit. I know that we're walkers and rollers. So when I say bike, ped, just think walkers, rollers, cyclists, everybody. I'm just going to be a wonk and say that over and over again, probably. Those lists we actually gave to the department and asked them to score those lists using a climate and equity lens. And so we've actually gotten that back from the department now, tiered into a couple of different tranches. So I think in this space, we're really going to be focused on using that climate and equity lens to prioritize our spending. Now, all of the bike ped projects we have in Move Ahead are important and we got to build them all, but we can't do it in 1 year. So we're going to start with the folks who have the most at risk, those marginalized communities that are breathing the worst air, our indigenous communities that have been disconnected, since we settled this land and confiscated it from Native peoples. So we have an obligation to those folks that have been most marginalized by our systems to bring support and connectivity to them first. So I think that will be in these early biennia. You'll see stuff in tier 1 of those lists, which meets also the Climate Commitment Act, where our funding is coming from demands that the legislature target between 30 and 50% of our funding for marginalized and indigenous communities. So we're going to be both meeting the terms of the law, but I think also meeting our moral obligation to get connectivity to the folks that have been most marginalized, most left out first. Unfortunately, big surprise, on the highway side, we don't have that sophisticated climate and equity analysis. We're sort of building that lens and that mechanism while we're doing this work. So we will do our best with what equity and climate analysis we have to try and prioritize there, but it's not going to be as easy in all parts of the budget. Thankfully, in the bike ped space, it was one where the department could readily get that done for us over the interim. So where we can use these lenses, we will use them. Where they're not available, we're going to try and be as open and transparent and inclusive as we can be. On the highway side, obviously, we've got some stuff that's under construction, so it's going to be a priority to keep stuff that's currently being constructed in process. And then we also have a court order on the culverts that we've got to replace salmon blocking culverts in our watershed by 2030. So that's going to be an early priority as well, because we don't have an option to vary from that. But if there are, and I've seen in the chat, obviously some more detailed questions about particular projects, happy to dive in on more specifics, but that's some general kind of philosophy for, I think, I will say for at this point, Senate, although I've heard Representative Fi say similar things, but I will let him speak more in detail to his decision-making process.
Can Mr. Liias talk about building climate resilient communities connected by bike? That's one of the items on the list.
One of the Washington, yes. Okay, so he's speaking to the Washington Bikes legislative agenda list. So that would be great. And so I'll just let you know, the list that you saw on the slide, those are kind of our high level buckets, like our values that we're showing up to work on behalf of in Olympia. And then there will be specific priorities that fit underneath each of those. And so that one specifically is connected to a future-wise priority, which last year was 1099, coming back again this year. And that's it's a comprehensive plan. It's a Growth Management Act bill that would add climate to comp plans. And there's really exciting kind of changes as part of that, like lowering vehicle miles traveled and lowering greenhouse gas emissions. And so I'm sure Senator Liias has things to add, but I just wanted to flag that's kind of what you're seeing there on the screen. Maybe before we jump just all over the ledge agenda, if we can focus in on I think something that's going to take quite a bit of committee time this year will be these strategies to address the traffic safety crisis. And so just trying to kind of do a high level outline of what we're expecting to see introduced this session. And so I could kick off with the bills that I'm excited about and working on, and then would love if Senator Liias can kind of fill in what some of our partners are also teeing up. So we work closely with the Cooper Jones Active Transportation Safety Council, which was created back in 2017 with Senator Liias. And we have Jesse who leads that work on the call today. And so, you know, a lot of what they're focused on is like what's going wrong in our transportation system for people walking, biking, and rolling, and then what are solutions that we can recommend. And so one of the recommendations is that currently there's a gap in, there's a requirement for folks when they've been involved in a serious crash with a vulnerable road user, somebody walking or biking, that they're supposed to go through retesting for their driver's license at the Department of Licensing. And right now it's like language just isn't harmonized. There was a change at one point in 2021, and there's just a gap now. And so we're really going to just marry that language back up and ensure that everybody who was involved in a crash like that will have to retest to get their license. So that's something that we'll be working with Senator Frame and then newly elected Rep. Reed for this upcoming session. And another item is to a prohibition on right-hand turns at red lights. And this is something that there's a pretty high percentage of crashes associated with that traffic action. And so, and we know that, you know, the worst crashes happen at intersections. And so the idea is in high pedestrian areas, so around schools, public parks, rec centers, transit centers, that we will be asking local jurisdictions to prohibit, or basically allowing for them, directing them to prohibit those right-hand turns. This is something that Senator John Lovick will be leading in the Senate. And then there are a lot of other strategies out there about safety on our streets and roadways. And so maybe I'll kick it over to Senator Liias just to speak to some of those that Washington Bikes will be supporting, but maybe not lead on.
Yeah, and at a high level, we are trying to be data-driven in our approaches and identify solutions that there's evidence that it shows it'll have a meaningful impact. So that's why I appreciate Alex identifying a couple of those. We know that there are, again, the Cooper Jones task force, part of their mission is to actually look at fatality data and sort of anchor this in what's happening in our communities. And so I appreciate that the free ride on red is an example of one where we're seeing serious accidents and fatalities, and we're going to link a solution that tries to address what we're seeing on the ground. And we're going to try and do that throughout the traffic safety agenda, so that when we're asking people to make sort of tough behavioral change, it's rooted in evidence to show that it's going to have a meaningful impact. So one area we know has a meaningful impact is driver education and training. Data shows us that young drivers that get access to driver's education before they're licensed are 50% less likely to be involved in serious accidents, serious crashes and fatalities. So 50% is a big number. We also know that in our state, if you're 18 and you didn't take driver's ed, you can then sit for the exam. The evidence shows that those drivers that get licensed without driver's ed at 18, 19, 20 are the most dangerous drivers on our roads in terms of their average serious crashes and fatalities. And so getting driver training to those folks is going to be really important. Now, for some people, cost is a barrier, so we're going to work on how do we equitably get access to folks. For other people, it could be geography, so we want to focus on how do we get driver's ed back into our public schools, because a generation ago, that's where a lot of folks accessed it. So we're going to think through it kind of through a couple of lenses, but fundamentally, we want more people getting trained. We also know that impairment and speed are issues that are really serious and that are involved in a large number of serious crashes and fatalities. So the state of Utah has reduced the blood alcohol content that is allowed to operate a motor vehicle from 0.08 to 0.05, and they saw a 25% reduction in fatalities after that was implemented. So again, for Washington State, that's something like 30 or 40 people a year that would be alive if those numbers bear out here, if we implemented that. So we want to, changing how we deal, and there is a carcerative and a criminal justice involvement there, which is uncomfortable, but we also know that impairment is causing people to lose their lives. So we want to sort of change the behavior, change the expectations about when you drink and drive and what should that limit be. On speed, we made some incredible advances in Move Ahead to authorize a dramatic expansion of the use of speed cameras across the state, particularly in our school, park, and hospital zones. The place we sort of left out is our highway work zones. And we see workers that are routinely involved in serious crashes and unfortunately even fatalities on our highways because people are speeding through construction zones. So that'll be a place where we're going to authorize the use of mobile speed cameras as well. States that have done that have seen dramatic reductions in speeding through those work zones. And when people are slowed down, they're paying closer attention to the road conditions, and we see safer conditions for workers that are out there. Those are some of the big pieces. I'm sure that I've forgotten one in this discussion, but we're going to be looking for as many ideas as we can get, and looking for the data to show that it'll be meaningful so that we can tell folks that, yes, we're asking you to change, but we're asking you to change because the data shows us it's going to lead to fewer fatalities, fewer serious crashes, more Washingtonians getting home safely from the trips they're out doing. And Alex, I'll also say just, because we haven't talked about safe systems, that was also baked into Move Ahead. So Move Ahead requires the Department of Transportation to take a safe systems or complete streets approach as they build future projects. So that will slowly, they've implemented it, but it's going to take time for that to really materialize on the ground. So we're not just focused on behavior change, but that will be a lot of the bills we're talking about will be about behavior change this year. We are also focused on the infrastructure side. We more than doubled the bike and ped safety grant program as part of Move Ahead. We more than doubled safe routes to school. We did the complete streets mandate for all WSDOT projects. So our infrastructure is going to be getting better. We also want to make sure that our driver behaviors and user behaviors out there are getting better as well. So we're trying to do kind of both at the same time and use data to guide the work that we do in this space.
Yes, thank you so much. And thanks for hooking us back to that. That's what I was trying to point out when we first started was we had these just huge unprecedented wins last year, but we won't see that play out immediately. And so in the meantime, we're also taking an approach with some policy change. So thank you for highlighting those. I think just looking at time, Tamar, do you want to start teeing up some of the questions that you're gathering?
Totally. Yeah, I'm going to give us one more slide of, we're talking about all of these great things that are coming up, all of this work that's to be done. And I just want to recognize that, this year we're going to be in Olympia, and that's so exciting to think about, being able to be face to face with folks and get in the room with people to talk about this and move this work forward. Recognizing though that a lot of you are from very, very far away places from Olympia, and that traveling to the capital will be difficult, and that we can't do this work without you, regardless of where you live. And so that we will be on the ground in Olympia, but that we'll have opportunities moving forward for all of you to get involved in this work, to show why these priorities matter, to really get in the virtual room or the in-person room with your legislators to make the case for the issues that matter most to you. And so we'll be having a virtual lobby day on February 6th. We'll have other opportunities for testimony, letters to the editor, any other ways that we can think of for you all to be able to share your voice, to have FaceTime with your legislators, and to move this work forward for your community. So there'll be more opportunities moving forward, and I will be sharing them with all of you in the next days and weeks. But again, it's a really exciting and a big task ahead of us over the next 105 days, and we won't be able to do it without all of you. But with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we'll get into some questions for the two of you. Let me pull that up And again, thanks everybody for putting your questions in the chat. Feel free to keep doing so. We have about 15 minutes, and so we will try and blast through as many of these as we can, recognizing that there's always opportunity to follow up with us via email and connecting with your legislators through session as well. But I think, and yes, Phil, you just put a question in the chat. Our lobby day will be February 6th, and you'll get more information soon. So I think the first question that we have is for you, Senator Liias. Alex had teed this up a little bit earlier, talking about, given that it's your second session as transportation chair, and last year, Move Ahead Washington was really passed in unprecedented ways, one of which was that there wasn't a ton of bipartisan support, and it really was a move ahead as quickly as we can and really get this through. And I'm wondering how you plan to approach this work in the next session. What do you hope to see stay the same and change, and what do you expect to see?
Yeah, I mean, we work in bipartisan cooperation with our Republican colleagues on the budget. Even in my first session as chair, the supplemental transportation budget passed unanimously or virtually unanimously off the Senate floor. So on the day-to-day budget work, we work closely in parallel. I will say, you know, the shift that Move Ahead represents for our transportation system is not one that has bipartisan support broadly at this point. And that's part of why I just want to underscore Tamar, you and Alex's comments about the virtual lobby day. We are not going to get bipartisan support for this multimodal vision without people across the state speaking to their lawmakers and underscoring how important this is. Putting safe infrastructure in every community is not a partisan issue. Like, it doesn't just, not just Democrats ride on bike lanes. There are even Republicans, believe it or not, that like to bike and walk safely. And what we need is our colleagues to hear this. I've had colleagues tell me, well, nobody bikes in my community. And then I visit and I see people walking on the side of the highway. And I'm like, obviously somebody wants to move around safely. There just isn't infrastructure for them. So I think we need your voices out there. And, you know, we had to make a choice with Move Ahead, you know, trim back on the direction, the change in direction to get more bipartisan support, or just boldly move the state in the direction we need to go and build more bipartisan support as we implement. And, you know, candidly, Chair Fye and I, as we looked at it, said, we've got to reduce emissions, we've got to improve safety, and we have to build a multimodal system. So let's get started, and then we'll build, now that people see, you know, 100% increase in youth ridership at community transit and huge double-digit increases in Spokane and other places, I'm hoping that that success then we'll get Republican lawmakers to say, well, I wasn't sure it was a good idea, but now that I see the results, this makes sense. You know, and we're not going to get everybody, but that's part of the hope, is that as we move forward, as we do it successfully and show, you know, a lot of criticism we got was this is a Western Washington heavy package. If you look at our bike ped transit investments, they're going to be all over the state. The Complete Streets mandate is going to be in every part of Washington. So once people start to see better, safer infrastructure showing up in every community, I'm hoping that that will help us build success. We also need you all, you know, particularly if you have a Republican lawmaker on your delegation from your neighborhood, to be telling your lawmakers why. And I see Phil, Yakima. So I know there's some folks here who have Republican lawmakers, to just candidly and honestly tell your story. Like, here's why this is important to me and my community and my commute and my moving around the community, so that people who don't think this is important realize that there are people in every part of the state that are committed to this and want a safe multimodal system for all of us.
Oh, go ahead, Alex.
I was just going to add really quick, just for folks here who maybe aren't as familiar with how Washington Bikes does show up in Olympia, in all the years up to Move Ahead Washington, we really do work in a bipartisan fashion. And so anytime we have priority legislation, I mean, we're trying to have both Democrats and Republicans signed on, knowing that bicycling and walking, it's not partisan, right? People do choose those activities no matter what their political affiliation. And so just to say, I mean, we definitely see it as part of our kind of objective moving forward to really start building support and love for what was secured in the Move Ahead Washington package. So we'll be pulling all of you along with us in that work.
I think a couple more questions about Move Ahead and the implementations of it. A question from Don asking, can legislators monitor capital grant programs to ensure that low burden and high success for small jurisdictions and Eastern Washington jurisdictions as a way to help gain that bipartisan support?
Yeah, we haven't targeted specifically Eastern Washington in terms of geography, but built into the governor's budget recommendations and in conjunction with the amazing Barb Chamberlain at the Active Transportation Division, there is a recommendation that we set aside part of safe routes and part of our bike ped safety grants for capacity building to help our smaller jurisdictions do the active transportation planning that will make them successful in future grant cycles. And so my vision and my hope is that for our smaller jurisdictions, we've got communities in our state where they don't have a planning department, they have a planner, and that's it in the whole city. And they're doing permit review, and they're doing planning of comprehensive plans, and they're doing everything. So, it's not unrealistic that they're not going to get a really sophisticated active transportation plan if that's all on one person's shoulders. So can we come in, bring resource through the grant programs to help them get those good plans in place so that then they're poised to be successful in grant applications? That's part of the governor's recommendation. I'm strongly supportive of this kind of capacity building work because I think it is important from an equity perspective for our smaller jurisdictions to have that support. I see my dear friend Everett Councilmember Paula Rines on. Now, Paula, they have a huge planning department and an amazing active transportation plan and a great city council that's doing good work. So, they probably don't need as much of this capacity building support, but then next door in a smaller jurisdiction, this may be a real barrier. So we want to make sure that everybody can compete and that the best projects that will have maximum impact for folks are the ones that win. And we don't want the size of your city or the size of your planning department to be a barrier to that.
And Stephen asked a question just now in the chat. Does it help that those of us who use bike trails in our right-wing Republican communities communicate that? And my answer is absolutely yes. I think being in community with your legislator, sharing your story, sharing your experiences, explaining why this matters to you is so critical in those folks understanding that and being able to move that forward in priorities and legislation. And we'll have more information on how to do that ahead of lobby day, but definitely yes.
Yeah, and I just, the age-old adage, you attract more bees with honey than with vinegar. Even though you might personally be a Democrat and your lawmaker might be a Republican, I will tell you, I have Republican constituents that bring me good ideas and priorities, and I represent everybody that I'm elected to represent. And if it's on an issue of civil rights or something that's my core values, we're just going to disagree. But if they say, hey, this is something my neighborhood needs, I'm going to listen. I don't ask what your partisan label is. So I think you might identify as a Democrat. You might not even have voted for this person. You don't have to share all that. Just say, hey, in my neighborhood, this is the infrastructure we need. Would you mind coming out to bike it with me? I want to show you what it's like to bike on this in part of town, because you may not realize how tough it is here, and I want to show you what I'm going through. Those kinds of interactions, if you approach it with sort of grace and humility and a little bit of a positive attitude, you can get even folks you might think would be disagreeable to at least listen and consider your perspective. And maybe they won't become our biggest champion, but maybe they also won't be our biggest obstacle. And that is progress in and of itself.
I think we're going to pivot a little bit for Move Ahead so that we can try and touch on a couple different topics. I do want to note that somebody had asked about Complete Streets mandates and where they apply, and that was answered in the chat. So feel free to take a look in there. But let's take a look at some of our other questions. It looks like there are some about speed limiting. One is regarding Target or Vision Zero. Is there a role for the legislature to ask the governor to engage with his colleagues and the federal government to limit the speed that vehicles can travel? Looks like the New York State legislature reportedly is considering legislation to limit vehicle speeds through regulation.
Yeah, in the European Union, they're looking at automated speed restricting technologies. So just like your car warns you when you're departing from the lane, and if you don't listen, the new cars will actually kind of bump you back towards your lane. They now have infrastructure where the car will begin to slow you down if you're exceeding the speed limit. So I think that is really a federal decision, but the city of New York is moving forward with some work in their public fleets to enable that technology. I'd like us to look at that here to see if we could get our public fleets to start piloting the use of these speed limiting technologies. And we absolutely, the NTSB is calling for this at the federal level, very supportive of that. In fact, I introduced a kind of letter to Congress. We call it a joint memorial to ask Congress to consider this last session, because I do think we want to use technology where we can. Baked into the bipartisan bill, there's also a requirement by the middle of this decade that there be impairment detecting technologies in our cars. Now, whether that's like seeing your eye movements or testing your sweat through the steering wheel, they don't know yet what it's going to be, but like where we can get technology to help detect impairment or someone that's speeding or someone that's distracted, like let's do that. Those are going to be predominantly at the federal level, but again, where we can help at the state level, I want to be a part of that. And I chat regularly with the chair of the National Transportation Safety Board, exchange ideas on what they're seeing as best practices. We're going to continue to do that and be a voice of support for her efforts as well.
And then along with that, thinking about speed limiting, a question about the social requirement for safety. So there is the state legal requirement, RCW 4661, for folks who want to get into the nitty gritty, requires cities and towns to justify any speed limit over 25 miles an hour, and asking what, if any, safety standards are in this requirement and what might count as an adequate justification.
Yeah, that is probably a step more detailed than I usually get. I'm not an engineer by background. I will say the legislature has removed all barriers to jurisdictions that want to lower speed limits. You used to have to go through an engineering process to justify reducing speed limits, and we've eliminated that because and I think Tacoma just has broadly reduced speed limits on their neighborhood streets. We should make that easy as part of Vision Zero plans. What I do know is that there's manuals and guidelines for the sizes of streets that our engineers are using and applying. And that's sort of like the extent of my knowledge. So there is a process to determine the safe speed limit. If you want to raise the speed limit, we are asking folks to do more analysis on that. If you lower it, we're trying to make that easier. But that we've now reached sort of the end of my technical knowledge, and we should probably turn to, I see we've got Brad from City of Edmonds or others can probably follow up in the future on kind of more of the nitty gritty of how this plays out at the local level.
Thank you. I was just going to jump in to say, I promised Jeremy that I would get you out of here at 1:45. And so want to be mindful of that, and just want to really thank you for joining us and talking about the session ahead and kind of diving into these questions that folks are interested in. So thank you very much.
But I just have to say, since we're in a room full of friends, Alex Alston is the patron saint of our bikers, walkers, rollers in Olympia. You are so well represented by Alex and the perspective she brings, as well as the whole team. Obviously, you all are a great chorus, but if you have to put one person up front, Alex Alston has been an incredible partner in the work we're doing. So please, after I leave, throughout the rest of this call, share lots of love to her. It's a lot of hard work, but really grateful to be part of this community, and in particular to have a partner as wonderful as Alex.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, we will talk to you soon. Thank you. And then tomorrow I'll pass it back to you for kind of next steps.
Totally. Yeah. So there definitely were more questions in the chat that we didn't have the time to get to today. We want to be respectful of everyone's time this afternoon, but we will put at least I'll put my contact information in the chat right now so that folks can send their questions along to us. We want to make sure we're answering all of your questions, want to make sure that we're really getting everybody prepared for the session ahead. So I just dropped my information into the chat there. Feel free to follow up with me. And again, thank you all so much for being here. Like Alex said, there's more information to come. You'll be getting an email from me tomorrow, including the link to the recording of this session so that you can check back for info that you may have missed. You'll get information about Lobby Day coming up, which Rachel also just dropped into the chat. And in the next month leading up to Lobby Day, we'll have a ton of information for you all and other opportunities to get the tools that you'll need for Lobby Day. We'll have some trainings, we'll have some guides. We'll make sure that everybody is ready to go when you meet with your legislator. I think Senator Liias really underscored this, but we can't say it enough that your stories, the things that you're saying, the experiences that you have in your communities are priceless. They're incredibly important for your legislators and for making sure that the issues you care about are being addressed. So again, look forward to all of that. Look for an email from me tomorrow and in the coming weeks. And again, thank you all so much for your time and for being here. Looking forward to the next 105 days.
Thanks all.
Bye, everyone.